I didn't ask my wife if the baby was mine, because the date on the pregnancy test already answered that for me. My name is Ethan Walker, I'm 36 years old, and up until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had a normal life in a quiet suburb outside Denver, the kind of place where neighbors wave, lawns are trimmed every Saturday, and nothing ever really happens. Olivia and I had been married for 8 years, no kids yet, but we talked about it, planned for it, or at least I thought we did. She worked in corporate consulting. The kind of job that came with last-minute flights, polished emails, and those weekend work trips that started showing up more and more over the past year. I didn't question it at first. You don't question someone you trust, you fill in the gaps with belief, with routine, with the assumption that everything is exactly what it looks like, and for a long time, that assumption held. Friday mornings she'd pack a small suitcase, say something about a client meeting in Chicago or Dallas, kiss me on the cheek, and by Sunday night she'd be back. Tired, distant, but still Olivia. Or at least the version of her I recognized. Looking back, I can see the pattern, the way the trips lined up a little too neatly, the way her phone started facing down on the counter, the way her answers got shorter when I asked simple questions. But at the time, I told myself it was stress, career pressure, adulthood, the usual things people blame when something feels off but not broken. What I didn't know was that those weekends weren't about work, they were about something else entirely. Something I wouldn't fully understand until the night everything shifted. It was a Tuesday, nothing special. I got home around 7:15 p.m. Traffic was light, stopped by a grocery store on the way back, grabbed a 6-pack and some takeout. The house was quiet when I walked in. Olivia wasn't home yet, which wasn't unusual. She'd texted earlier saying she had a late meeting. I set the food down, kicked off my shoes, and went into the kitchen to throw away the receipt. That's when I saw it, sitting right on top of the trash like it had been placed there carefully, not buried, not hidden. Just there, a pregnancy test, white plastic, small, ordinary, except for the 2 pink lines staring straight back at me. I didn't react right away. I just stood there, hands still holding the receipt, staring at something that didn't make sense. Olivia and I hadn't been trying, not seriously, and more importantly, we hadn't been close like that in months, not since before those weekend trips became routine. I reached down slowly, picked it up, turned it over in my hand like it might explain itself if I looked at it long enough, and then I noticed something else, something small but final, the digital timestamp printed along the edge. It was from Saturday morning, 9:42 a.m., and last weekend. Olivia told me she was in Chicago for work. I didn't say anything when she walked in later that night, didn't ask questions, didn't raise my voice. I just watched her, the way she moved through the house like nothing had changed. Like everything was still intact, and in that moment, I realized something cold and steady. This wasn't a mistake, it was a timeline, and timelines don't lie. I have learned that the most dangerous moment is not when you discover the truth, it is when you decide to live with it for a little while longer just to see how deep it really goes. So I did exactly that. I said nothing. I placed the pregnancy test back where I found it, and I waited. Olivia moved through the evening like she always did, heels off by the door, laptop bag set on the counter. A quick smile thrown in my direction like a routine she had practiced 1,000 times. She asked about my day. I answered the way I always did, steady, simple, normal, because normal was the last thing she expected me to be, and that gave me something I needed, time. Dinner was quiet, the kind of quiet that would have felt comfortable a year ago but now felt staged, like we were both playing roles we had already outgrown. She talked about a client presentation, something about numbers and timelines that I barely followed. Not because I could not understand it, but because I was doing my own math. Saturday morning, 9:42, Chicago. Except she was not in Chicago. I watched her hands as she spoke. Steady, controlled, no hesitation, no visible crack, and that was the part that stayed with me, not the lie itself, but how easy it came to her, how natural it sounded, like she had been living inside it for a long time. Later that night, she fell asleep quickly, back turned toward me, breathing even, calm, the same way she always did. I lay there staring at the ceiling, running through every weekend trip in my head like rewinding security footage. Dallas, Seattle, Chicago again, all of them. suddenly felt less like work and more like something carefully constructed, a pattern hidden in plain sight, and once you see a pattern, you cannot unsee it. The next morning I did something I had never done before. I did not confront, I did not accuse, I observed. I woke up early, earlier than usual, and sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, watching the house wake up around me. Olivia came down about 20 minutes later. Dressed for work, composed, efficient, she kissed me on the cheek. The same way she always did, light, automatic, and asked if I would be home for dinner. I said yes, my voice steady, almost detached, like I was listening to someone else speak. She smiled, grabbed her keys, and walked out the door, and just like that, the house went quiet again. But this time it was a different kind of quiet, not peaceful, not empty, but waiting. I finished my coffee, set the mug down, and walked upstairs to our bedroom. Her side of the closet was organized, too organized. Everything in place, everything controlled. I opened her suitcase, the one she always used for those weekend trips, and for a moment I just stood there, staring at it, knowing that whatever I found next would not give me comfort, only clarity, and clarity has a cost. I unzipped it slowly, the sound louder than it should have been in an otherwise silent room. Inside were clothes, neatly folded, travel-sized toiletries. Nothing unusual at first glance, but then I noticed something small, tucked into the inner pocket, a hotel key card. I pulled it out, turned it over in my hand, and read the name printed across it. A hotel in Denver, not Chicago, not Dallas, not anywhere she said she had been, just 10 miles from our house. I let out a slow breath, not anger, not yet, something colder, something more precise, because in that moment, the story she had been telling me for the past year did not just crack, it collapsed, and what was underneath it was not confusion, it was intent, deliberate, repeated, planned. I set the card down on the dresser, looked at my reflection in the mirror, and for the first time since finding that test, I understood something clearly. This was no longer about suspicion, it was about proof, and I was not going to ask her for the truth, I was going to let her show me all of it. There is a difference between knowing something is wrong and proving it, and once that line is crossed, you cannot go back to being the man who trusts without question. So I started small, controlled, nothing reckless, nothing that would tip her off. I went to work like I always did, sat through meetings, answered emails, but my mind stayed on one thing, patterns, because patterns do not lie, and Olivia had been living inside one for months. Maybe longer. Around noon I pulled up her company website, something I had never bothered to look at before, not closely. I knew the name, the general structure, but this time I was not looking as a husband, I was looking for details, her department, her team, and then I saw it, Daniel Brooks, senior partner, the same name she had mentioned casually over the past year, always in passing, always neutral, like he was just another name in a long list of colleagues. But now the name stayed on the screen longer than it should have. I clicked on his profile, professional photo, clean-cut, confident, the kind of man people describe as successful without needing to explain why. I did not feel anger when I saw his face, not yet, just recognition, like finding a missing piece you did not know you were searching for. Later that afternoon I did something even simpler. I checked our shared phone plan, itemized call logs, timestamps, numbers. It took less than 5 minutes to find what I was looking for, a number that appeared over and over again. Late nights, early mornings, weekends when she said she was out of town, the same number. Consistent, deliberate. I wrote it down, stared at it for a second, then searched it, and there it was, Daniel Brooks. The confirmation did not feel dramatic, it felt quiet, almost expected, like the story was unfolding exactly the way it was designed to. That night when Olivia came home, I watched her differently, not as my wife, but as someone I was studying, every movement, every word, every pause. She mentioned another trip coming up, this weekend, Boston this time. She said it without hesitation, like she believed it herself, and I nodded, the same way I always had, because the truth is, I needed her to keep talking, to keep building the version of reality she thought I still believed in. After dinner, while she was in the shower, I walked back into the bedroom, opened her suitcase again, and this time I looked deeper, not just at what was there, but at what was missing. No business folders, no printed materials. Nothing that suggested actual work, just clothes, carefully chosen, not for meetings, but for something else, something more personal. I closed the suitcase slowly, sat on the edge of the bed, and let everything settle into place. The test, the hotel card, the call logs, the lies. It was no longer a question of if, it was a question of how long, how many times, how carefully it had all been planned. And then something else clicked, something colder than the rest. If she was pregnant, and if those weekends were not what she said they were, then this was not just about betrayal, it was about intention, about rewriting reality in a way that included me without my consent. I leaned back slightly, exhaled, and for the first time since all of this started, I made a decision. I was not going to confront her in the kitchen, or the living room, or in the middle of some emotional argument. I was going to wait, because people reveal the truth more clearly when they think they are safe. And Olivia still thought she was safe, and that was the only advantage I needed. By Thursday, the routine had already set in, not the old routine of trust and normalcy, but a new one built on observation and restraint. I stopped reacting and started measuring every word she said, every move she made, every gap between what she claimed and what I could verify. It all went somewhere in the back of my mind, like pieces of a structure I was quietly assembling. Olivia mentioned Boston again that morning, casually, like it was already decided. Flight early Saturday, back late Sunday. She even complained about the timing, said it would ruin her weekend, and I nodded. The same neutral expression I had been wearing for days now, because the truth is, once you see through someone's story, you realize how much effort they put into making it sound ordinary. That afternoon, I left work early, something I rarely did, and drove 10 miles across town, the same direction printed on that hotel key card. The building came into view exactly where it should have been, a clean, modern hotel tucked between a business park and a row of restaurants. Nothing suspicious about it, which somehow made it worse. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, engine off, hands resting on the wheel, not nervous, not hesitant, just aware that this was the point where assumption turns into confirmation. I walked inside like any other guest, calm, unremarkable. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus and polished wood. People moved around me without noticing, which was exactly what I needed. I approached the front desk, asked a simple question about room availability for the weekend. Kept my tone casual, and while the receptionist checked her system, I let my eyes move across the room, scanning, not for her, not yet, but for familiarity, for patterns, for anything that connected this place to the life I thought I was living. When I stepped back outside a few minutes later, I did not have a room, but I had something else, confirmation that this place operated exactly the way someone would want if they were trying to keep things separate, private, routine. I got back in my car and sat there for a while longer, watching the entrance, watching people come and go. And that is when it hit me, not as a shock, but as a realization that had been building for days. This was not random, it was structured, predictable, intentional. Later that evening, Olivia came home with takeout, smiled like she always did, asked if I wanted Thai food, and I said yes, because saying no would have meant changing the pattern, and I needed the pattern to stay intact. We ate on the couch, television on, conversation light, almost comfortable if you ignored everything underneath it. At one point she leaned against me, the same way she used to, and for a second I almost forgot, not the facts, but the weight of them. Then I remembered the timestamp, the hotel card, the call logs, and the moment passed just as quickly as it came. After dinner she went upstairs to pack, said she wanted to get it out of the way early. I followed a few minutes later, stood in the doorway, watching her fold clothes into that same suitcase, efficient, practiced, like she had done it 100 times before. Maybe she had. I asked her one question, simple, neutral. Boston again? And she did not even look up, just nodded and said yes, like it was nothing, like it had always been nothing. And that was when I understood something final. She was not afraid of being caught, because in her mind, there was nothing to catch, only a story she believed she controlled. And as I stood there watching her pack for a trip that I knew was not real, I realized I was no longer reacting to what she had done, I was preparing for what I was about to prove. Saturday morning started like every other one she had described, except this time I was not staying behind and filling in the blanks with trust. This time I was following the facts. Olivia left the house at 7:10 a.m., suitcase in hand, coffee in the other, moving with that same calm efficiency I had watched all week. She kissed me lightly on the cheek and said she would text when she landed. I nodded, stood in the doorway, and watched her pull out of the driveway without hesitation, without looking back, and the moment her car disappeared around the corner, I closed the door, not with anger, not with urgency, just with decision. I waited exactly 15 minutes before I moved, enough time to make sure she was committed to the route she wanted me to believe. Then I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and drove in the opposite direction of the airport, straight toward that hotel 10 miles away. Traffic was light, the kind of quiet Saturday morning where the city has not fully woken up yet, and as I drove, I kept thinking about how simple this had become, not emotionally, but structurally. Lies only work when no one checks them, and I was finally checking. I pulled into the same parking spot across the street and sat there for a moment, watching the entrance again, the same revolving door, the same steady flow of people, nothing dramatic, nothing that would stand out to anyone else, but to me, it was everything. I stepped out of the car, walked across the street, and positioned myself just far enough away to see without being seen. Minutes passed slowly, each one stretching longer than it should have, and then I saw it, her car, pulling into the lot, not rushed, not cautious, just normal. Like she had done this so many times and no longer required thought. She parked near the side entrance, grabbed her suitcase, and stepped out, and for a second, I almost expected something different, some hesitation, some sign that this was not what it looked like, but there was nothing. She walked toward the entrance with the same posture she used when leaving for work, confident, composed, certain, and then he appeared, Daniel Brooks, standing just inside the glass doors, waiting, not surprised, not early. Just exactly where he was supposed to be, like this was not a coincidence, not a last-minute meeting, but something scheduled, repeated, expected. He stepped forward as she approached, took the suitcase from her hand without a word, like it was routine, like it had always been his role, and she let him. No resistance, no explanation, just a smooth transition from one life to another. I stood there across the street, hands in my pockets, watching a scene that did not need sound to be understood. Because everything about it was clear, the way they moved, the way they did not look around, the way they did not need to speak. This was not new, this was not a mistake, this was a system, a second life running parallel to mine, and in that moment, something settled inside me, not anger, not even betrayal, but clarity, the kind that removes doubt completely. I did not walk in, I did not confront them, I did not interrupt the scene, because this was not the end of anything, it was the beginning of something else, something that required patience, precision, and proof that could not be denied. I turned away from the hotel, walked back to my car, and sat there for a long moment, staring straight ahead, letting everything I had just seen lock into place, the test, the lies, the hotel, the man, all of it connected now, and for the first time since this started, I was no longer trying to understand what was happening. I already knew, now I was deciding what to do with it. Clarity does not come with noise, it comes with silence, and by the time I drove away from that hotel, I was quieter than I had ever been in my life, not because I did not feel anything, but because everything had already been decided somewhere deeper than emotion. I went home, sat in the same kitchen where I had found that test, and for the first time, I did not look at it as a shock, I looked at it as evidence, something real. Something measurable, something that could not be explained away with words or timing or excuses. I placed it on the counter in front of me and just stared at it for a while, 2 lines, simple, final, and then I did something I had been holding off on, not because I was unsure, but because I needed the right moment. I picked up my phone and scheduled a DNA test, private clinic, discreet, no discussion required. The appointment was set for Monday morning, early, before work hours. And when I confirmed it, I felt something settle into place, not relief, not satisfaction, just alignment, like everything I had seen over the past few days was now moving toward a single point. The rest of the weekend passed quietly. Olivia texted me that she had landed, sent a picture of what looked like an airport terminal, but even that felt staged now, like part of a script she had been following for months, maybe longer. I replied the way I always did, simple, supportive, normal. Because normal was still my advantage, Sunday night she came home around 9:30 p.m. Suitcase rolling. Behind her, expression tired but composed, she kissed me, asked about my weekend, and I answered without hesitation, because the truth is, I no longer needed to catch her in a lie. She was already living inside one, and I was already outside of it. Monday morning came faster than I expected. I woke up early, dressed, and told her I had an early meeting. She nodded, half asleep, and I left the house without another word. The clinic was quiet, sterile, efficient, the kind of place where people do not ask questions they do not need to ask. I checked in, signed the forms, and sat down in a small waiting area, hands resting on my knees, steady, controlled. When my name was called, I stood up and followed the nurse down a narrow hallway. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just forward movement. The procedure itself was simple, quick, clinical. A sample taken, a confirmation process explained. Results expected within a few days. But I already knew what those results would say, not because I was guessing, but because I had already seen enough to remove doubt completely. When I walked back out into the parking lot, the air felt different, not lighter, just clearer, like the last piece of uncertainty had finally been removed. I got into my car, sat there for a moment, and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in all of this, I did not see confusion, I did not see hesitation. I saw someone who understood exactly what was happening and exactly what came next, because this was no longer about discovering the truth, it was about what I was going to do once it was undeniable. The hardest part about waiting is not the time, it is acting like nothing has already changed, and by the time Tuesday came around, I had perfected that act down to the smallest detail. Olivia moved through the house like she always did, morning coffee, quick emails, a schedule that looked normal on the surface. But now every movement felt rehearsed to me, like I was watching a performance I had already seen the ending to. She asked if I could pick up groceries after work. I said yes. She mentioned another possible trip next week. I nodded, and the conversation ended there, simple, controlled, empty in a way I had never noticed before, because once you stop believing someone, even their normal words start to feel like placeholders. That afternoon my phone buzzed while I was at my desk, a number I recognized immediately, the clinic. I did not answer right away. I let it ring once, twice, then I picked up, stepped outside into the quiet of the parking lot, and listened. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, direct, confirming that the results were ready, available for pickup or secure viewing. No emotion, no assumption, just information. I thanked them, ended the call, and stood there for a moment, not moving, not reacting, because I already knew what those results would say. This was not about discovery anymore, it was about confirmation. I drove to the clinic after work, same building, same hallway, same quiet atmosphere, but this time it felt final. The receptionist handed me a sealed envelope, nothing dramatic, just paper, just ink, just truth in its simplest form. I took it, walked back to my car, and sat in the driver's seat with it resting in my hands, unopened. For a long moment I did nothing, not because I was afraid, but because I understood that once I opened it, everything that came after would be irreversible. Then I broke the seal, pulled out the document, and read the line that mattered: probability of paternity 0%. Not likely, not uncertain, not a margin of error, 0, clean, absolute. And in that moment, something inside me went completely still. No anger, no shock, no collapse, just clarity, the kind that removes every last piece of doubt and replaces it with direction. I folded the paper carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and set it on the passenger seat. Then I drove home. The same route, the same streets, everything looked exactly the same, but none of it felt the same anymore. When I walked through the front door, Olivia was in the kitchen, cooking, music playing softly in the background, the kind of scene that used to mean comfort, stability, home. She turned, smiled, asked how my day was, and I answered the way I always had, steady, calm, because the truth is, nothing in my tone needed to change for what was about to happen. I set my keys down, took off my jacket, and stepped into the room like any other evening, but this time, I was not carrying questions, I was carrying answers, and the difference between the two is what changes everything. There is a moment when the truth stops being something you hold in your hand and becomes something you carry into the room, and that night, I carried it with me without saying a word. Olivia stood at the stove stirring something in a pan, the smell of garlic and butter filling the kitchen, the kind of ordinary detail that used to mean everything was fine. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled, asked if I wanted a drink, and I said no. My voice even, steady, exactly the way it had been all week, because the difference now was not how I spoke, it was what I knew. I walked to the counter, set the envelope down gently, not dramatic, not forceful, just present. She did not notice it at first. She kept cooking, kept talking about her day, something about a meeting that ran late, a colleague who made a mistake, small details meant to fill space, and I let her talk. Because silence has a way of pulling people deeper into their own story. After a few minutes, she turned off the stove, wiped her hands on a towel, and finally looked at me fully. There was a pause then, subtle but real, like she sensed something had shifted even if she could not name it yet. I slid the envelope across the counter toward her, slow, deliberate, and said one simple thing. You should read that. No accusation, no raised voice, just a statement. She looked at the envelope, then back at me, confusion flickering across her face. What is it? She asked, and I did not answer. I just watched. She picked it up, hesitated for a second, then opened it. Her eyes moved across the page quickly at first, then slower, then stopped completely. The room went quiet in a way that felt different from before, heavier, final. I could see it in her expression, the exact moment the meaning landed, not all at once, but in pieces, like something breaking under pressure. She looked up at me, mouth slightly open, searching for something to say, something to hold on to, but there was nothing left to adjust, nothing left to reinterpret. Ethan, she started, her voice softer than I had ever heard it, uncertain, and I raised my hand slightly, not to stop her, but to hold the moment where it was, because this was not about explanations anymore, it was about reality. 0%. I said calmly, not loud, not sharp, just clear. That is what it says. She shook her head instinctively, like denial could still change the outcome. It is not what you think, she said quickly, the words coming faster now, trying to rebuild something that had already collapsed. But I did not interrupt. I let her speak, because people reveal the truth most clearly when they are trying to hide it. She talked about stress, confusion, timing, anything that could soften the edges of what was already defined, and I listened, not because I believed her, but because I needed to hear how far she would go to maintain the story. When she finally stopped, the silence returned, and this time it stayed. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I was not seeing my wife. I was seeing someone who had made a series of choices, consistent, deliberate, and I spoke again, the same steady tone, the same controlled calm. You did not just lie about where you were, I said. You tried to make me part of something that was never mine. The words hung in the air between us, not aggressive, not emotional, just true, and in that moment, there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to explain, only the weight of what had already been done. The silence after the truth lands is different from any other silence. It does not ask questions, it does not wait for answers, it just sits there, heavy and unmoving. And that night, it filled every corner of the room. Olivia stood across from me, still holding the paper, her hands slightly unsteady now, the confidence she carried all week gone, replaced with something uncertain, something exposed. She tried to speak again. Softer this time, slower, choosing her words carefully like they might rebuild something if she said them the right way. But the truth is, there are moments where words stop having power, and this was one of them. I did not interrupt her. I did not raise my voice. I just listened until she ran out of things to say, until the explanations circled back on themselves and fell apart under their own weight. And when she finally went quiet, I stepped back slightly, creating a space between us that had not been there before, not physical distance, but something more permanent, something defined. I am not going to argue with you, I said, calm, controlled, the same tone I had held onto from the beginning. Because this is not confusion, it is not a misunderstanding, it is a series of decisions. She shook her head again, tears forming now, but even that felt different to me, not because it was not real, but because it came after everything else, after the lies, after the planning, after the certainty she had carried into all of it, and I realized something in that moment. This was not the part where I needed to react, this was the part where I needed to move forward. I walked past her, picked up my keys from the counter, and headed toward the door. She called my name behind me, once, then again, the sound sharper the second time, but I did not stop right away. I opened the door, let the cool night air come in, and only then did I turn back, not to reconsider, not to hesitate, but to say what needed to be said. "You made your choices," I said, steady, clear. "Now I am making mine." There was no anger in it, no volume, just finality. The kind that does not leave room for negotiation. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and for a moment, I just stood there on the front porch, looking out at the same quiet street, the same houses, the same stillness that had always been there, but now it felt different, not broken, just honest, because everything that was hidden before was now in the open, and that changes how you see everything. I walked to my car, got in, and started the engine. No destination planned, no rush. Just movement, because staying still was no longer an option. As I drove away, I thought about how easy it is to mistake stability for truth, how routine can cover things that are already falling apart underneath, and how long you can live inside something without realizing it has already changed. But more than that, I thought about what comes after, not the betrayal, not the confrontation, but the part where you rebuild something that is actually yours, something that does not depend on someone else's version of reality. And for the first time in a long time, I was not thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I had taken back, my time, my choices, my future, and as the road stretched out in front of me, quiet and open, I realized something simple but absolute. The truth does not destroy you, it clears the way for everything that comes next.